The following is a classic edition of the UnX News Radio Show with Margie Kay, directly from the UnX News Radio archives. This show may contain date-specific references and information. Enjoy the program.
This is Margie Kay with UnX News Radio, and it's great to be back after some time off. Coming up here in just a few minutes, my guest is going to be Kathleen Marden, and she's going to be talking about not only her new book, but also some things that she hasn't spoken about before on any radio station or any interview. So this is going to be very interesting. We are speaking with Kathleen Marden. She's a well-known UFO abduction researcher, author, and lecturer with 23 years experience in the field. Kathleen, you are just a super, super busy person. You've written several books, and you've got a new one out as well.
Yes, the Alien Abduction Files, the most startling cases of human-alien contact ever reported, with Denise Stoner this time as my co-author. I always like to work with a co-author. I view it as a social event, and I think that solitary writing is a very lonely experience, and I'm a social person.
Well, yes, indeed. And you've written Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, and Science Was Wrong with Stanton Friedman. What was that like?
It was a completely enjoyable experience. Stan and I think alike. Our writing style is somewhat similar. We just clicked right away and worked extremely well together. It was a very smooth going all the way, and that's why we decided to write that second book together. We continue to work together, and when we're at the same conferences, we share a vendor table together. So he's become a good friend.
Before we get into your latest book, you mentioned to me that you would talk a little bit about some of your family experiences and some things that nobody has heard before. So let's go back in time a little bit and tell me what that's all about.
Okay. Well, for many years, I had a very closed mind to paranormal phenomena. And people would ask me about my aunt's reported psychic experiences or paranormal experiences, and I'd just poo-poo it and say that it was, I thought it was nonsense. But, boy, I had an eye-opening experience somewhere along the way when I realized that alien abduction could not be explained by the scientific paradigms that we now have that look for material evidence, and that there is something really there, but that whatever it is something that we have to develop new paradigms in order to understand what's going on. And theoretical physics touches upon it now. And I think part of that came through discussions I had with theoretical physicists such as Claude Swanson and Jack Kasher. And they really started me thinking. And then, actually, I wrote a chapter in Science Was Wrong, and this was on telepathy experiments. And I was fascinated by the subject after I read The Conscious Universe by Dean Radin, Ph.D. And this was all about telepathy experiments that have been conducted all over the world. Now, I had only read what debunkers had stated about telepathy, and I was convinced that the experiments were not scientific based upon their statements. And I guess they're the ones who grabbed the attention in the media. And then I really started to explore all of this. And I discovered that tightly controlled scientific experiments that have been done all over the world in universities and that they show convincing evidence that telepathy is real, that some people have this ability. And so it brought me a long way in a paradigm shift in my own way of thinking. And so I've been exploring this much more and have been more open, far more open, to the fact that these phenomena are real.
So have you personally had any telepathic experience?
Not between individuals, but yes, I have had, not with humans, but with ETs.
Okay. So that is what everybody wants to hear about. What has been the communication with ETs?
Well, and I don't even know if this is real, or if it's only something that occurred in a dream state. But the funny thing is that I have had some of these experiences that are often described as alien abductions. I was recently asked that question, and although I'd been in denial for years about it, I thought, I'm going to answer this honestly. And so I did have an experience just on February 3rd. And I tried to explain it as in a prosaic way. And it was just a nocturnal bedroom kind of experience. I wasn't driving outside. I wasn't in a car, and I didn't have missing time or anything like that. But I woke up during the night and I was receiving messages. And I thought these messages were from extraterrestrials, and I reasoned that, oh boy, well, this must just be that I'm dreaming this because I'm working very hard on this book, The Alien Abduction Files, and transcribing hypnosis sessions and that sort of thing, and messages that were given to experiences from ETs. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was probably the answer to the messages I was receiving. I didn't get up out of bed and write them down. I just thought, well, maybe I'll write them down in the morning if I remember. And I decided to turn over. And when I did, I realized I had a back injury, a lower back injury. And it was excruciatingly painful to turn. And I also had a head injury. The back of my head felt as if I'd received a really heavy blow. And it was quite startling. I didn't know how to explain this. And so I just fell asleep. And over the next several days, I thought, well, maybe it's because I carried a new shoulder purse the day before that. And so I started experimenting and tried to create that kind of problem for myself again, the pain, and I couldn't do it. And so I decided, well, maybe I'll try hypnosis and see what happens. And I did. And in hypnosis, I found myself on a craft. I was in a dark room, kind of small. There were beings standing there. There was this little tiny alien standing beside a table with a huge round head and big glistening eyes. And he was being sort of reprimanded in a way for putting me down too hard. And he had made a mistake. And there were two other taller ones standing at the end of the table, one down by my feet to my left, and the other one at the foot of the table in front of my feet. And I didn't have really good recall of anything after that. except for a message that stated that sort of like they were sorry that they had to do this, that this was a process that they were doing to preserve human DNA and to propagate the species, because they felt that humans were and could be an endangered species, and they needed to do this process, and that they were not the decision makers. That they were taking orders from decision makers in order to do this. And hypnosis is fallible, and perhaps it was all confabulation, but it was a very strange experience, to say the least. And boy, just to look into the eyes of that little gray was really something. He was about just above the height of that table. He was pretty short. And
wow.
That huge, round head and great big eyes. He was kind of cute, actually, I thought. And the others were so concerned about me. But that's really not what I was going to talk about. I was going to talk about paranormal experiments that my Aunt Betty did with Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson, but you managed to get that out of me.
I'm psychic, and
Yeah.
I do remote viewing, and we've done a little work together on that, and I have felt all along that you have been an experiencer since childhood.
Yes, you told me that.
Yeah, and these sorts of things seem to follow family.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously your aunt was involved. And, in my own family, we have 3 generations that we know of for sure that have been involved, probably 4. Mm-hmm. So, it's just not surprising to hear this. There are many, many other stories like this. And do you think maybe, they let you remember this experience, or, kind of have confirmation that this sort of thing is real, for other people because of the work you're doing?
That is possible, but, I think that I remembered this experience because there was an accident. This little helper of theirs, their assistant, made a mistake and injured me.
I see.
And I can't think of any prosaic explanation for that injury. But what I recalled under hypnosis explained it perfectly. I was dropped from above.
Now that would make sense. Now you mentioned that you remembered them having some telepathic communication. Did you ever recall what that was?
Yes, actually, under hypnosis, I stated that telepathic communication was the message that I had just given you about DNA collection and their concern that our species could become extinct, that we are endangered, that they spoke of an environmental disaster, but didn't go into any detail about that. So I don't know exactly what the message meant.
Well, we can certainly imagine anything from nuclear war, which at the moment is not too far-fetched, to chemical disasters or disease. Could be anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Genetic engineering of our food to meteor strikes.
Yeah.
Asteroid strikes. I mean, who knows?
Just had a close call recently with that. Some people actually feel that asteroid that almost got us was taken out by ETs. And that's why it blew up in the atmosphere. But, and that's coming from some remote viewers I know.
Yes, I did see, I think it was on YouTube, something about some individuals felt that they had filmed UFOs guiding the asteroid away, or near the asteroid at least.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a little comforting to think that ETs are watching out for us in various ways.
It is comforting, and I hope that, I'll have more of these experiences and remember more and receive messages that I can impart to other people.
Well, you mentioned to me in an email a UFO landed on your grandparents' farm, and this was across the street from your childhood home. And this was during Betty's contact experiments with Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson. Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson were two individuals who interviewed Betty and Barney Hill in November of 1961, just 2 months after their close encounter with the UFO and missing time experience. And Robert Homan worked for IBM as a technical writer, scientific writer, and C.D. Jackson was a senior engineer. And a couple of great guys. I had the opportunity to meet them because they enlisted Betty in contact experiments, and these were titled by them psychophysics experiments. And what they did in this experiment was they would script Betty, giving her certain instructions to try to vector in a craft to a certain location. And she would read this aloud and think about this for days at a time. And then they would go out and they'd keep looking and see if they could see a UFO in the location that she attempted to vector it into.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the first places that she did this experiment with was to vector a craft into my grandparents' farm. So, and I grew up across the street from that farm in Kingston, New Hampshire. So in I would say it was about 1964, a craft did come in and land on my grandparents' farm. It was observed by one of our neighbors who was a commercial pilot as he was returning home from work in the middle of the night. All of us were sound asleep in our beds, but when the craft came in, it sheared off some trees. And it made a noise, a sound that woke my grandparents up, but also woke up my younger brother. And my grandparents looked out the window at it, and they saw this, bright craft outside on the ground, and they were really terrified. Apparently, my grandmother had said to my aunt, "Well, just tell them to come up to the house and knock on the door, and I'll give them a cup of coffee." It was sort of a family joke. She didn't think that Betty would actually be able to do that. So, well, the funny thing is that then my grandparents heard this on the front door.
Oh boy!
I mean, they were even more terrified by that, and hiding so away from the windows and that sort of thing. And finally, they just, I guess, they went back to bed and slept for the rest of the night. But my brother received a phone call the following morning. I guess my grandparents hadn't called the house or come over to tell us about this. And it was from a friend of his. The friend was the son of this commercial pilot. And he told my brother about his father's sighting of the landed craft the night before. So my brothers and I got dressed and ran out and onto the farmland and found the spot where this craft had landed. There was physical trace evidence on the ground.
Oh.
And we called my Aunt Betty, and she and another UFO investigator went out and collected some of the physical trace evidence. Well, what happened after that is that we started to have paranormal activity in my childhood home. And it hadn't occurred before my aunt's contact experiments began, as far as I know.
This is interesting.
Yes. And so I was wondering if there was a link here. So when Denise and I did our commonalities among abduction experiencers research study, this was a year-long study with 50 abduction experiencers, and we had a 25-member group of non-experiencers who sort of served as a control group. We found that 88% of the abduction experiencers had had paranormal activities in their homes, and that the vast majority of them had these experiences start immediately after an abduction. So I found that information fascinating.
This is fascinating, and I'm particularly interested in this. After years of investigations, I just told several people around me a couple of days ago that I have a theory that the poltergeist activity for some people who are UFO abductees is actually related to ETs in their houses that they can't see.
That's a very good explanation. I had developed sort of a theory on that too, and I was wondering if the science that the ETs used in order to pass through a solid surface and to pass a human body through that surface as well, sort of opened up a vortex. And in that vortex, perhaps beings from other dimensions came in occasionally as well. But maybe it is the ETs in their invisible state, because we know that it's only a matter of vibrational frequency. And I've talked to some theoretical physicists about this, and they told me that if the ETs can adjust their vibrational frequency and the vibrational frequency of that window or wall that they're going to pass through to the same frequency, and then they adjust the human body to that frequency, matter can pass through matter. And that we've even done this on a very small scale in a laboratory.
What are some of the things that happened in your own childhood home?
I was actually a teenager at the time, and we had never had any kind of paranormal activity in my home. And all of a sudden, after this craft landed on my grandparents' farm across the streets, we had poltergeist activity in the house. We would have doors that would open and close on their own right in front of people. One time it was quite startling. We had company, and everybody was seated in the dining room having coffee and cake or something like that. And all of a sudden, the front door simply opened and closed on its own. Also, we had sliding doors in our back hall. The children's bedrooms were back there. I had two brothers and myself. And there was the hallway closet with very heavy sliding doors. And one day, my father was home alone, and those sliding doors started sliding back and forth and back and forth. And he yelled, "Stop that and get out of here." And it continued. It happened once again. But he was pretty frightened and startled by that. Another time, I have to tell you, my father was a Boy Scout leader, and he had feathers to make Indian headdresses out of. They were doing Native American lore at that time. And he had these in his bedroom on a work table, and the bag of feathers just lifted up into the air, tipped over upside down, and the feathers went all over the room.
Oh, my gosh.
That was another thing that happened. And then my brother told me that I was away at college, and he was in fighting he wasn't fighting, he was in Germany during the Vietnam War. He was in the Army. And what happened when he arrived home on leave was that he was standing in the living room, and a light orb came right into the living room, right at him, and almost hit him. It jumped out of the way, and this couldn't possibly have been headlights or anything like that. It was a little light orb. Oh, I've seen them too, maybe about the size of a softball. I'm not positive about that, because I've seen only one, and it was after I'd gotten divorced, actually, and I had 2 children. I moved from Colorado back to New Hampshire, and I was staying temporarily in my mother's home. And I woke up during the night to a lot of ruckus coming out of my 5-year-old son's bedroom. And so I got up and I opened the door and I looked in, and there he was chasing around a light orb, trying to bat it. And I'm telling you, this was not a firefly or anything like that.
Oh.
And I didn't know what to make of it, but I just very quickly picked him up and carried him into my bedroom. So that was another thing that happened.
Wow.
Also, years before that, I'm jumping around here, but years before that, in about, I would say, 1968, I took a boyfriend home from college on vacation. This was for a weekend, to stay at my parents' home to get to meet the family. And he was staying in my brother's bedroom. My brother was away in the service, and sleeping soundly, when in the middle of the night the closet door opened and coat hangers lifted and were thrown across the room and landed on top of him. You can imagine how startled he was. He wouldn't spend the rest of the night in the house.
Oh, I imagine. I think I was just talking about how oftentimes people who have had experiences or sightings of UFOs or ETs also have poltergeist experiences. And my thought is that what if some of this poltergeist experience is ETs walking around the house rather than ghosts, all the time? And that doesn't mean it couldn't be one or the other, but I just find it fascinating that you have so many people that have both experiences. But like Kathy was saying, she believes that possibly there's like a portal opened, and then that makes it easier for other things to get in and out. So, I think the jury's out on what it is, and there are, theories.
It is quite possible. There are different theories on this too, and one theory is that the only people that are taken are those who can resonate at a certain vibrational frequency, and that the ETs are able to actually discover this through some process, and that those are the ones that they take to begin with. But it is possible too that they have altered the human's vibrational frequency. Anything is possible, I guess.
So, has everyone in your family had these experiences?
Not everyone, but several people have told me that they have.
Okay. Is there any indication that this is something that follows the generations?
Dr. James Harder was the first researcher, I believe, who looked into this and traveled all over the country. He was actually an engineering professor at the University of California at Berkeley, and very much into astrobiology. And he was also the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization's chief abduction investigator, or the director of abduction research, I guess you would say. And alien abduction was his specialty. I met him when I was a teenager, I guess, or no, I guess it was after that. It was as a young adult at my Aunt Betty's house in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. They were friends. He was out visiting. He was also a skilled hypnotist, and he had worked with Travis Walton. He was the hypnotist who did the hypnosis on Travis Walton after his experience. And he also hypnotized several family members. He talked to us first about our encounters with UFOs, because several of us had had close encounters. And then he hypnotized us to find out what we came up with. And he did state that he believed that it followed family genetic lines. So
yes,
he was the first one.
That's a recurring theme.
Yes, it is
absolutely.
A recurring theme.
Now, going back to your own hypnotic regression, we do have a question in the chat room asking who performed the regression for you. And this is the recent one. My
co-author and person that I do research and investigation with is Denise Stoner. And Denise is a certified hypnotist, and she has advanced training in hypnotic regression and also post-traumatic stress disorder. She's highly skilled at doing this.
Okay. And I have another question in the chat room. When you found out that you were injured from the encounter, did you see a doctor for the injuries?
No, I didn't. I didn't feel that the injuries were bad enough to see a doctor. I didn't have a fractured skull or anything like that. The pain went away in 5 days. I'm still bothered a little bit by the lower back pain, but I'm taking care of it myself. I tend to avoid medical doctors.
Yes, I do too. Although I did find a good one here in Kansas City who is also a naturopath, if you can believe that.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Well, looking back from your childhood, pre-ET experiences and then after, how has that changed your life?
Well, how has it changed my life? Well, I think the thing that really changed my life was that my aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney Hill, had a UFO abduction in 1961. And there was no mention of UFOs in my family that I was aware of before that. Of course, I later found out that my mother had had a close encounter in 1957, but she didn't speak about it to the family. And when on September 20th, 1961, when I heard about my aunt and uncle's close encounter, when they called my mother, Betty's sister, and I was seated in the same room, I was really shocked and startled to think that we were being visited by beings from another planet. I had no prior belief or knowledge of this. And so it started me, I think, on a lifelong course to inquire more about this. Initially, I was quite frightened about it, especially in about 1964, when I found out that my aunt and uncle had actually been abducted, and this was after they had spent 6 months in hypnotherapy sessions with Dr. Benjamin Simon a renowned psychiatrist from Boston, Massachusetts, who used deep trance hypnosis with a great deal of success. And I remember after I heard about that, and I was driving a car in, I guess it was about 64 or 65, I was old enough to drive, and I would be frightened about driving alone after dark. And even when I babysat across the street, I would just run as quickly as I could back to my childhood home. So there was fear that went along with this. And I think that I developed sort of a new sense of uneasiness about being alone at night. I was fearful of the dark. I was fearful of my bedroom closet. And I've heard that many, many times about people being, who are experiencers being fearful of their closets. Mm-hmm. Then I just, I tried to ignore it. I went on with my life. Through high school, I was a good student. I was a member of the student council, secretary of the student council. I went on to college and studied social work. And then I went on and studied education, did graduate studies in that. And started out as a social worker, but fairly rapidly switched careers to education. I discovered that I enjoyed teaching more than I enjoyed social work. And went on to become an education services coordinator. And in with all of that, I married and I had children and just had a very normal, down-to-earth life while I sort of read about UFOs and spoke to my aunt, spoke to researchers who would visit her at her house, but I'd never gone to a UFO conference, and I wasn't really well aware of what was going on in the field until about 1988 to 1990. And that is when I left my job and started a career as a writer and as a researcher. And my first book was going to be a biography of my aunt's life. And I lived close to her. We spent a lot of time together. And she then started to turn all of her files over to me. And they included all of her, the original investigation reports, the Project Blue Book report that she and my uncle had made to Pease Air Force Base, letters to and from scientists, a tremendous amount of information. And a lot of it was information that had never been released to the public. It was confidential at that time. She also turned over her hypnosis tapes to me for comparative analysis. I transcribed all of the tapes, and I'll tell you, I was a terrible typist back at that time. And the book that I was writing eventually captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience, which really was a biography and a case study of my aunt and uncle's UFO close encounter and abduction. And it included the evaluation by scientists of all of the evidence that was left. Because in my aunt and uncle's case, those ETs left a lot of evidence that they didn't leave in any case after that. But Betty and Barney were the first.
I've got a question in the chat, and I will come back to this real quick. From your research, this is from Michael in Arkansas. From your research, how many people report the entities masking their true appearance, and do they report also seeing dead friends or relatives along with the entities?
The only time that I've heard of the dead friends or relatives along with the entities is when the when the person believed that the ETs were doing an experiment, an emotional experiment with them, and produced a holographic image of that dead person, or even sometimes a dead pet, to see what kind of emotions it evoked from the experiencer on the craft. And what was the first part of that question?
How many people report the entities masking their true appearance?
Masking their true appearance. Many people state that at the beginning of an abduction, at the onset, if they're driving outside, and I have to tell you, the majority of the experiencers who participated in the commonalities study said that they had at least one experience where they were in an external environment, most often driving outside when they had an abduction. And they might be stopped by a herd of deer, 4 or 5 deer standing in the road. Immediately after they have seen a very bright light or a lighted craft coming rapidly in their direction. And then they would have a missing time event. An alternate scenario would be that an owl would come down, fly down, and land in the road and stop the vehicle. And this owl would be maybe 3 feet tall. And, I'd say to the experiencer, well, then what happened after this owl stopped you? Well, it walked over to the passenger, to the driver's side of the car and just stared in the window at me. And then I'd say, well, when did it leave? And I'd hear, well, I don't know when it left. I just drove off when it was gone. So, it's that sort of thing. So sometimes we have large rabbits. Sometimes we have owls. Sometimes we have deer. Sometimes we have other animals. And I really don't know if the extraterrestrials are, in fact, changing their image or if they're only altering our perception of what we see.
Kathleen, I think we better get to your book here for the last segment here. We want to talk about Alien Abduction Files, the most startling cases of human-alien contact by Kathleen Marden and Denise Stoner. And this just recently came out, right?
That is correct. In fact, it's available on our websites right now at www.kathleen-marden, MARDEN.com. $20 includes the cost of the book and shipping, and it's autographed as well. It's also available on Denise's site at denisemstoner.com. And it is available for pre-order right now at Barnes & Noble and also at Amazon. And in fact, they might even have the books in at this point. I'm not positive, but I've received my copies from my publisher. So they are in hard copy right now. There are also going to be several electronic versions of the book as well. But the official release date is not until May 20th. And Denise and I would love to talk about the book together around that time or after that.
Oh, yes, I'd love to have you both on.
But I could mention it briefly tonight.
Well, I know a little bit about what's in it because I filled out one of your questionnaires for the book. How many people did you interview for that part of it?
Well, for the commonalities study, we interviewed 50 people who were experiencers, and then we had 25 people who were not experiencers in sort of a control group. We wanted to ascertain that the experiences reported by experiencers were common only to them and not across the general population.
And what are some of the things you found out as a result of these surveys?
Well, we found out that the majority of people, well over 50%, have had a close encounter or missing time experience. You know, we're often led to believe that all of this happens when you're asleep in bed. Not the case. I mean, it might happen after a missing time event, but initially it usually doesn't happen that way. Most people have had a close encounter and missing time. Many people have witnesses as well. I was surprised to see that these abduction experiences are continuing on as people age. Many people were reporting experiences well into their 50s and 60s. They were still being visited. So that was quite extraordinary as well. The majority said that they were happy individuals that had happy childhood. They seemed to be very stable individuals. And this is also supported by research findings done at universities. UFO abduction experiencers generally are not suffering from any kind of mental illness or personality disorder, no more than the general population. We also found that experiencers are generally people who are having difficulties falling asleep and remaining asleep during the night. And this is generally linked to the fear of abduction. And we found that people who were able to overcome that fear were far more likely to be able to sleep through the night. And so I think that it's really important for us to focus upon that issue in order to help experiencers to be able to accept what's happening. You might not like it, but you're not going to be able to do a lot to change it. And just for people to know that they're not going to be harmed. And, you know, that might help people to be able to sleep, since it's such a huge problem. And I also spoke about paranormal experiences, and many people said that they became psychic. They had psychic experiences or were more sensitive or after they had had an abduction experience as well. And some even had short-term healing abilities. And for a very small percentage, this continued throughout their lifetimes. Also, the majority of people said that they were under 20 years of age when they had their first experience, and most said that they had more than 10 experiences throughout their lifetime. So it was interesting results, and we've written about that in the alien abduction files when we're talking about certain individuals' cases. The book is actually divided into 3 sections. And the first section is about my investigation of an important series of events in the lives of Ed and Denise Stoner. 2 missing time experiences that they had with witnesses. Well, there's a lot of evidence here. It includes hypnosis transcripts. It includes documented information that Ed had written down at the time that these experiences happened. It includes also a sworn statement by a person who was expecting their arrival, and when they arrived 3 hours late with no prosaic explanation. They had merely sighted a lighted object coming very rapidly in their direction. Their car was then pulled off the highway, and as if only a moment had passed, they found themselves 40 miles down the road. It was 3 hours later. their odometer did not register the 40 miles. And Ed had been watching it because he was checking gas mileage, and he had just checked the odometer before this experience happened. And the odometer was not broken. It was very, very perplexing to them. So that's just a little taste of something you'll find in the book. The second section of the book is about my investigation of a multi-generational abduction experience, or series of them, in the state of New Hampshire. This is a woman that my Aunt Betty initially had worked with. And it's a funny thing, Betty was working with her confidentially, and I hadn't met her until many years later when she came to me, after Betty just sort of stopped doing that sort of thing. And I worked with her for many, many years investigating her case and her family's abductions in the state of New Hampshire. And then the book is divided into a third section. We hadn't originally even intended to put this third section into the book, but our publisher insisted, and, the publisher always rules
yes.
what you have to do with your book if you want to have it published. So then I did preliminary investigations on several other abduction cases. And what I have written about is the preliminary investigation. In two of those cases, they had been investigated by other investigators before I did mine. So I had the information that other investigators had found. Some of it is very compelling information as well. And but I always want to investigate any case myself. And even though some of the other investigators are very highly respected people, I want to find out for myself what I think, how I would assess this case. So I've written about several of those. And then near the end of the book, I discuss alternative hypotheses for alien abduction, ranging from psychological explanations, religious explanations, explanations of interdimensional beings from an astral realm, and then sentient extraterrestrial beings as well, and sort of bring in ideas of others and their evaluations, and Denise's and my feelings about these sort of things, our opinions as well. So that, in a nutshell, that's what the book is about.
Well, this is fascinating because I think you've taken a different approach than other people have in the past. So this is going to be, I'm really looking forward to getting my copy of this book. And you touched on something while you were talking. Now, you said Denise and Ed. I assume this is her husband?
Yes.
Okay. How many cases have you heard of where the husband and wife have ET encounters or abductions at the same time?
Oh, I haven't even thought about the percentage, but it does happen fairly frequently, I think. I mean, I think the majority of people who contact me have been taken singularly. But with the Stoners and with many, many others, I receive reports of husband and wife. And it doesn't seem that Ed is the primary experiencer here. It seems like he was just along for the ride, and that they were really interested in Denise, but that they put him in some sort of state of maybe suspended animation on a craft. And that is where he was sort of lying on a hard slab in a darkened, domed room for a very long period of time.
I wonder why they didn't just leave him in the car
That's a good question. I wonder why. I wonder, who knows? Who knows? Yeah. It's all a mystery to me.
Well, it's true. The whole topic is a mystery, but it seems like in the past few years we're getting a better handle on it, don't you think?
Yes, I do think we are. And I've had reports of one partner lying in bed while another one is being taken, and even partners who have actually noticed a change in the surface of a ceiling or a wall where it seems to be moving, and then their partner is taken while they're placed into this sort of state of suspended animation.
Yes, that in the cases that I've worked on, that seems to be the norm. One partner is out while the other is being taken. It's rare to hear that they're both having the experience.
Many people wanted to contact me and speak to me personally about their experiences, and other people sent manuscripts to me they had written about their experiences. So I have those as well, but I did compile all of the statistical data, and that's what I did the analysis on. And in fact, I still have an ongoing study, and this is the ET technology survey, the second part of the study. And I still need people to participate in this. It's online at my website at Kathleen-Marden.com. And it's for people who can actually remember being on the craft and what they observed on the craft, had some idea of what technology was used, and can describe the emotions they felt, how they were taken, that sort of thing. And also can describe the entities that took them. So I'd appreciate it greatly if anyone listening tonight, who is an experiencer who remembers these things, would go onto my website and fill that out, because I really need 50 people in order to feel that this is scientifically valid.
Kathy, why should the alien abduction phenomena be of interest to the medical community?
I have many, many physicians who come up to me. They attend UFO conferences. They come up to my table and they speak to me. And some have told me that they have noticed certain conditions in their own patients, and that they've been very quiet about this, but they suspect that something is going on here. Denise and I found in our study that a high percentage, 38% of the experiencers who participated have a formal diagnosis of chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome, even though it's less than 1% in the general population. And this is a disease that can be debilitating. People are unable to work when it's in its worst form, and it waxes and wanes for years. It causes neurological problems. And so I think that members of the medical community really ought to take a good look at this condition in abduction experiencers, because it seems to be, it is a very high percentage of experiencers who are affected by this disease.
Well, it certainly is, and I'm one of them. All right. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time this evening. Kathleen Marden, The Alien Abduction Files by Kathleen Marden and Denise Stoner. Thanks so much for being with me this evening.
It was my pleasure, Margie.
And thank you to our listeners. This is UnX News Radio. I'm your host, Margie Kay. Visit my website at margiekay.com. That's margiekay.com. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the UnX News Podcast with Margie Kay. Any rebroadcast or duplication of this program or its content without express written permission from Margie Kay is strictly prohibited. The UnX News Podcast, in direct cooperation with the internet website margiekay.com.